In today's show, let's talk trades. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen and tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're talking trades. It's time. It's not really time, if we're being honest, but I want to get into the mechanisms of how the Blazers are going to be able to make a trade, because I do think that we have reached the part of the season. Well, December 15th, there are some trade restrictions. Most of the free agents signed over the summer can be traded, and it starts to sort of grease the wheels of the transaction machine. Usually you get a trade in January, and things really heat up in February. So we are like a ways away from the February 6th deadline. I think January will be much more active than December. People always like to point to December 15th like it's this big trade day. It is, I would say it is the beginning of more earnest and serious talks, because teams can go from the hypothetical to the actual, but typically we don't see things for another month. Although Mark Stein of the Stein Line likes to point out that usually there is one trade within the month. So it should happen, prior to January 15th. We may see one trade in a typical season. So I want to talk about trades and how they relate to the Blazers today. I also think, while trade season might not be here in earnest, I do think as a fan base, as a people, as a folk, people are anecdotally, of course, because this doesn't apply to all of you, but many Blazer fans are ready for some sort of change. I think we've sort of reached the part of the season where it's like, all right, I've seen enough of these dudes. Let's change it up. Let's do something different. Particularly on this team where it's a very similar roster to a year ago. Running back 13 of the 15 players, including a familiar two-way guy, hasn't played, but familiar two-way guy. I think there is maybe a little more impatience for the Blazers to do something, poking them with a stick, etc. I don't want to be a cold glass of water necessarily, although I sometimes do really enjoy being a party pooper, or at least being kind of a pedantic dork. But I don't think it's going to be easy for the Blazers to make a trade. And I want to get into that, why it will be challenging. And then I want to also talk about this. Before we get into all that, I want to talk about this. Who are we talking about? Who are we talking about when we talk about trades? Because it's a really narrow cast of characters, generally speaking. I think typically you're talking about 5 names on the roster. Certainly anyone could conceivably be traded. That's like... that it's open season, right? Eventually, that anyone could be traded. But we're generally talking about some of the players who are more experienced and many with higher price tags. I think there's 5 names that we're really talking about. We're talking about Anfernee Simons. We're talking about Jeremy Grant. We're talking about DeAndre Ayton. I think Rob Williams gets thrown in the mix, probably rightfully so, because he probably has some appeal out on the market. And a little bit you hear Matisse Thybulle's name bandied about, although I am wary to include him because he hasn't participated in a game this season, and I'm not sure that Matisse alone has much standalone trade value. The Blazers basically, although it was part of a larger package, traded him for 2 second-round picks. I bet that's kind of what Matisse will go for in now. I can't imagine that his value has drastically changed. I bet it's pretty similar to when the Blazers acquired him, which was fairly cheap. It's a worthy flyer on an interesting player. So we're kind of talking about 4 names. Rob Williams is still dealing with complications of concussion, has not been cleared from concussion protocol. Blazers don't play again until Friday. You would really hope that Rob is cleared by then. Otherwise, it seems like he's having some real challenges, and concussions are scary. It's your brain, but you would really hope. But obviously, he comes with some health caveats even outside of the current one. But I think, without getting too deep into Rob's trade value, I think we'll do that at some point when he's healthy again and playing, and we'll talk more about that specifically. I kind of want to lean into the other three. The Blazers' most experienced players, the Blazers' most expensive players, and the players that you most often, when you talk to members of the fan base, are the folks that people want to get traded. Ant, JG, DA. They will come with their own challenges to trade. Anthony Simons is not the type of archetype that has had particular appeal on the market. And he's having a down year. He's struggling. He's just not having a good season. He's had some moments, but he's had more moments when he has not been good. And last year he had a really hot December where he had a great month. He hasn't had that, right? He hasn't had a stretch where it's like, oh, he can score 28 a game with some ease on high efficiency. That just hasn't been him, and he always is going to have his defensive warts, and I think his playmaking, which was maybe felt like taking strides in the right direction last year. I feel like he has not been nearly as good a playmaker this year, and he's kind of resorted back to some maybe bad habits in terms of decision making and shoot pass stuff or shoot decision making stuff. On top of all that, I don't think combo guards who can't defend are particularly valuable. The name I usually throw out there is Tyler Hero, but my man Tyler Hero is killing it. If the Heat were ever going to trade Tyler Hero for a star, it's the time to do it. He might be the best player on the Heat roster this year because North Carolina's own Bam Adebayo is struggling a little bit on the offensive end. So Ant is not going to have I don't think Ant has a frothy trade market. I think there's enough evidence out there to suggest that combo guards who don't really defend are not highly sought after, and Anthony Simons is struggling. Jeremy Grant at the beginning of the year was killing it. I thought he was playing some pretty good defense. He had some nice defensive nights. He was shooting the ball really well. He's kind of come back to earth recently. He's had a maybe not even come back to earth. Maybe he's gone. Maybe he's below the surface. Right? He's beyond the crust. He's struggled. I think some of his decision making has kind of been wonky, and then also, in addition, he hasn't shot as well as he was early in the season, and the whole Blazers defense has kind of been a little bit worse over the last handful of games than it was for a stretch when they were playing at their best, and Jeremy's part of that. And I think Jeremy's, while he has, Jeremy's an archetype, he's the right size. In theory, he's been a good shooter, and he has 2 consecutive seasons of high-level shooting. He was shooting very well to begin this season as well. He's the type of player that would have some trade value, standalone trade value on his own. I think the challenge with Jeremy is the length of his contract. The money is real, $30 million approximately, but it's the length. It's the 4 seasons of Jeremy Grant, or if you're trading for him at the deadline, it's the 4 playoffs of Jeremy Grant. Obviously, another team can trade him down the line, but that becomes challenging. More on that in a moment. But I think the length of Grant's contract is the thing that would stymie his market a little bit. And there's been some reporting here and there from various sources basically reporting the same thing at various times, that the Blazers' asking price for Jeremy Grant is 2 first-round picks. And I would be very surprised if Jeremy Grant yields 2 first-round picks in the open market. Anything can happen. You only need one. But if that's the asking price, it seems to me the Blazers they're going to maintain a high asking price and hope they get it, and comfortable if they don't. That's my read on it. Whether they should be comfortable is a conversation for another day, but that is my read. Limited market because of his contract size and length, and the Blazers at high asking price. Jeremy Grant may be hard to trade just in and of himself. And then DeAndre Ayton. Ayton is a center, an offensive-focused center who doesn't shoot threes and doesn't particularly get to the free throw line very often. He's good at what he does. He's a good mid-range shooter. He's got good touch, although he has some bad hands on a bounce pass. Cannot catch a bounce pass. But I think if you look around the league, there are a lot of teams that could use a center. The problem is, do any of those teams also have a way to acquire a center making $35 million or the appetite to do so? I do think, in general, somewhat ironically, I think the Suns could use DeAndre Ayton's help. But it is... He already had a pretty, limited trade market when the Portland Trail Blazers acquired him. I do not think his value has increased at all, and he's having a bad year to begin this season statistically. He's struggling in a way that he didn't at the end of last season, when it's like, oh, okay, maybe he's kind of figured it out a little bit, and yada, yada, yada. this year hasn't been as kind to him. He got benched in the second half a few days ago, 4 days ago or whatever. You listen to Tuesday's show, that happened on Friday night, so 5 days when you're hearing this. It's for all of those reasons, the Blazers sort of pieces that you, dear listener, the sort of typical Blazer fan that I'm angling this toward, it's not easy necessarily, just like in and of himself, like if in a vacuum to trade these gentlemen, and not even a vacuum, in the sort of reality of their cost and their production, to find suitors for them. And then you throw in the restrictive nature of the current CBA. And y'all, it's still hard, and probably harder now to move these gentlemen than it would have been in prior to these rules kicking in last season. We might not see a lot of fireworks at the deadline. And if we do see the fireworks, they might be on the other end of the salary spectrum. Let's talk about that and why the big money deals just might not be moving in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, let's talk FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. They want you to tackle all of your NFL action this season. So if you're watching a game and you got a hunch, well, why not check out the FanDuel app, where you'll see everything you need all in one place so you can make your live bets. If you're watching Monday Night Football tonight, the Bengals and the Cowboys and a weird Simpsons broadcast, you could open up that FanDuel app and see the latest stats, then view play-by-play all on the same page where you place your wagers there on the FanDuel app. Just go to FanDuel.com and join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's right. New customers right now can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So visit FanDuel.com and never waste a hunch, and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. So we've covered who the Blazers maybe are. I don't even know if they're trying to move these gentlemen, right? Like, it's pretty clear that they didn't try to trade DeAndre Ayton. It's pretty clear they didn't try to trade Anthony Simons over the summer. Certainly there was some very real rumors that they were trying to trade Jeremy Grant, but I think for the most part, the reporting that we heard is that the Blazers were comfortable with this group and like intended to move forward with these guys. So like I'm not even suggesting, I want to be totally clear here because I think people media literacy is at an all-time low. I don't think the Blazers are intending to shop these people specifically. I think the fan base is interested in these gentlemen getting traded, and what I'm hoping to do here in this episode is illustrate the challenges associated with those trades. I'm not a big trade machine guy. I just don't like mashing it. I know that that's popular. I know many of you like it. Shoot, I know it'll probably make for a more listened to, viewed show. We'll get there at some point. But today's show is not the fake trade extravaganza. Today is more of the explainer of the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is getting more challenging. There are some league-wide levers that's going to make maneuvering, make deals more challenging to complete. And it's because of these dang aprons. The NBA's new the most restrictive CBA in the history of the league, and the new CBA kicked in this year in earnest. And there are mechanisms that prevent teams from making deals and then punish them for having expensive rosters. And the challenge of that is, if you want to win, you likely have to have an expensive roster. That's the case. And there is one specific rule that I'm going to get into here that I think is really going to make trades challenging, at least according to some of the public reporting. And maybe this will all blow over, but it does seem like right now, maybe teams are like, this is the feel it out year, and they're like, that's how it works. And then they'll sort of change their MO, and then the operating procedures going forward to respond to the reality of how the league works. So here are the rules. I'm going to try to not hit you with numbers too hard here because I think the broader strokes is what's important to understand. But basically, there's a luxury tax line. If you're above a luxury tax line, you pay a certain amount of tax, and as you go higher, the tax goes up incrementally, and also as you hit higher numbers, you get taxed more. Blah 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 blah. Above that tax line, about $8 million above that tax line, is the first apron. And if you hit that first apron, you have some restrictions. And then if you go above that line, you hit the second apron, you have the most restrictive situations in the league based on what you can do, how you can maneuver, and how you can improve your team. There are 4 teams right now that are above the second apron: Boston, Milwaukee, Minnesota, and Phoenix. Going for it teams, right? Teams that are designed to win championships, built to try to win titles, obviously to varying levels of success, but like go for it type teams. There are teams that are hard capped at the first apron: Dallas, the Lakers, Miami, the Knicks, and Philadelphia. These are teams with above that first apron. If you're a second apron team, if you're those 4 expensive teams, Boston, Milwaukee, Minnesota, Phoenix, you cannot aggregate salaries in trades. So you can't make 2 players equal 1 player. So if you're trading for a player that makes $25 million, you cannot take 2 salaries and aggregate them together to make $25 million. You have to have you can't aggregate trades. So you basically have to make 1-for-1 trades. And you can't aggregate players in a trade. You have to make 1-for-1 trades, and you cannot take back more money than you send out, not even $1 more. So if you're a second apron team, it's really hard to make moves. You're kind of locked into what you have. It's sort of why Boston kind of made its maneuvers early and then said, okay, let's sign everybody and get really expensive and try to win as many titles with this core as we can, because it's going to be hard and also very expensive to do so. But the challenge for the Blazers looking out in the world is not the second apron teams. It's not even the first apron teams. It's teams worried about that first apron. And here's the deal. If you complete a trade in today's NBA where you take back more money than you send out, where you take back even $1 more than you send out, you're hard capped at the first apron. So that's $8 million above the tax line. Those are going for it type teams, though. Teams that are going to pay the tax, teams that are going to push up towards that first apron, are teams that are trying to compete and win a championship, right? Those are teams that are aggressively pursuing winning, and those are the exact type of teams you would hope are trading for the Jeremy Grants. Obviously, there's a world in which, like when the Pelicans traded for CJ McCollum, I believe Zion was out for the season, and they had a really, their need to upgrade the roster was like specific to the organization and wanting to make the playoffs and yada yada yada. It was unique, right? But so there could be situations where that comes up, right? But for the most part, teams that are going to be acquiring high-priced vets are teams that feel like we're close and we need to make a move, or we're close and we have someone on the roster who needs to see that we want to get closer and we're going to make a move. But if those teams that are going to be pressing up against those luxury tax and beyond anyway get hard capped at the first apron and have some roster restrictions and money restrictions, it's going to limit their appetite for making trades. In fact, Jake Fisher of the Stein line wrote that an executive basically told him, it's like when you're exploring trades, say you find there's probably 10 teams that could be interested in our guy. And then you look at the financials and you say, okay, it's probably 2 teams who could realistically do it. So now instead of negotiating with a third of the league, you're negotiating with 2 teams. You're negotiating with a much smaller portion of the league. Your leverage has been kicked. I was also listening to the Hoop Collective with Brian Windhorst and my man Timmy Goodtimes, Tim Bontemps, as well as Dan McMahon. And they were discussing the Zach LaVine trade market. Zach LaVine having a much better year, I think quietly a much better year than he was a year ago. And basically what Brian Windhorst said is that the Bulls are very open to moving Zach LaVine, but he makes about $40 million a year, and he has not been productive enough. See combo guards who don't quite defend, and he's certainly way better than Anthony Simons, albeit another $15 million annually more expensive. But LaVine hasn't hit the level where there's market interest in him because there are teams that just couldn't put together a trade to make it work. Or if they did, they would be sacrificing some future flexibility, so there is just less appetite for doing so right now. This $1 rule is going to be a challenge. Taking back even $1 more than you receive in a trade, hard capping you at the first apron, is going to be a challenge for teams in the competitive cycle. So not for the Blazers, but for suitors for their assets, right? For teams that might be wanting to trade for their vets. Obviously, you can trade vets other places, and teams have different motivations, like I said, but like if you think about what's realistic deals out there, it's typically go for it type teams. It's teams that are like, okay, we are the 7th best team in the conference. We think we can become the 4th best team in the conference. Let's make a trade. Or like Dallas did last year, where they said, okay, we're going to send out some first round picks. We're going to chase it and add some, and retool the bench and add a bunch of role players. And like, we think we have the right top end talent. If we get the right mid-range talent, we can make the NBA finals. And they did. That's the go-for-it type teams. The mid-range players, the Jeremy Grants, the Anthony Simons, the DeAndre Aytons to some extent. That's who you're hoping the suitors are, but there are mechanisms in the league that will make it harder to complete these deals. So what if I told you that makes Duop Reath potentially the Blazers' most tradable big man? Who would have guessed? Join me in the third segment. We'll close the show and we'll talk about Duop Reath's trade value and the value of minimums in the current NBA. Join me on the other side. First, though, I want to tell you about Mint Mobile. Say goodbye. Say see you later to big wireless providers who never are going to give you what they say they are. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price skyrockets and you're magically paying a whole bunch more money. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about the gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. So say bye-bye to those overpriced wireless plans and the jaw-dropping monthly bills and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. You can use your own phone that you already have with any Mint Mobile plan. You can bring your phone number along with you and all the contacts that already live in your phone, and you'll get all of the plans will come with high-speed data, unlimited talk-to-text, delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. So to get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. It's $45 upfront payment required. It's equivalent to $15 a month. And new customers on a first 3-month plan only. Speed slower than 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You still listen to Locked On Blazers. There's going to be some challenges out there for trade season for expensive guys. It's going to impact the Blazers like it impacts everyone. I think there is a world in which this is a very quiet trade deadline for the big money makers and big names, and then the league kind of figures it out, right? Like all of the league says, okay, 1 year with the CBA, that's how it works. We'll make some changes in how we kind of approach things, right? Like in the coming seasons, we will be armed and ready to make, to find the edge, to find the loopholes, or if not even the loopholes, just find the way to maneuver it correctly. But Jake Fisher of the Stein line, Jake Fisher formerly of Bleacher Report and Yahoo Sports, I believe still works to some extent for Bleacher Report, but he's writing on Mark Stein's Substack. Stein was already a wonderful Substack subscription to have, and now he added Jake Fisher to the mix. It has some very solid NBA reporting and the type of reporting that I find interesting, which is how the sausage is made. A lot of news breaking is just the sausage delivered to you moments before the news becomes official. I don't care about the sausage. I want to know about the whole dang recipe. And Jake Fisher last week wrote a very interesting story about the recipe and about the value of minimum contracts in the NBA. And specifically, Duop Reath, Blazers' 4th center, maybe 5th sometimes when he's playing behind small ball center Jabari Walker, could have real value on the open market. What? Depends on what you mean by real value, but trade value in a way that minimum contracts probably previously didn't in a less restrictive CBA environment. To wit, during the summer, we saw a couple trades with the New York Knicks in which they utilized the value of minimum contracts to kind of get trades to go down, both in the Karl-Anthony Towns deal and in the Miles Bridges deal. Mikal Bridges deal, excuse me. In the Mikal Bridges deal, they used minimum contracts to expand trades, to make them 3-team deals, to make sure they were touching different parts of the trades to make it all work. And it allowed them to avoid some of the more punitive parts of the new CBA and acquire high-end talent. They also, gave up some talent and about a cajillion picks for Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges looks like a bad trade. Cat looks like a pretty good one. But I digress. The minimum contracts will become more valuable again just starting on December 15th. Prior to December 15th, teams, expensive teams, many of them in the league, are limited to the number of minimum contracts they can include in a deal, which is part of why the Knicks signed players to $1 over the minimum contracts in order to send them to Charlotte as part of a 3-teamer to make the Cat deal work, because that was how they were able to sort of skirt the minimum contract trading rule. Saying, okay, how about $1 more than the minimum? Technically, sign and trade, there you go. So minimum contracts could have value in 3-team deals going forward. But from December 15th until February 6th, that's the trade deadline this year, that those restrictions on the number of minimum contracts that can be included in a trade are lifted. And teams, even second apron teams, are allowed to acquire or sign as many minimum contract players as they want. So the expensive teams that need to get better, the Milwaukees, the Phoenixes, the Minnesotas to some extent, the way they might get better is either by, manipulating some 3-teamers and using minimum contracts to be able to manipulate it, or just outright scouring the NBA for the most valuable cheap contracts they possibly can, because that's the only way they can get upgrades. Enter Duop Reath. According to Jake Fisher of the Stein line, the Blazers have had early preliminary trade calls from teams saying, like, what's the deal with Duop? And as Fisher writes, is there a world where some, and I'm quoting here, where some rival front office, limited in ways to improve their team, values Reath's potential contribution enough to offer the Blazers multiple second-round picks? We're going to find out. If the Blazers can have trouble moving some of their high-level guys, high-price guys, is there a world in which some of their lower price tag players, their players operating on that minimum, particularly Reath because he's under the line of what's the 2-year veteran minimum line that matters for these trade stuff, for these trade rules, could that be their path to becoming more appealing? Does Duop Reath have more intrinsic trade value in a weird NBA world than DeAndre Ayton? Probably. Or at the very least, maybe. And he might have more intrinsic trade value just by virtue of being easier to move. And I think this is the interesting part of where we're headed. This is why I like the recipes. Is what happens this trade deadline, and Fisher writes about this in the Stein line, is like what happens this trade deadline is that the best teams, the go-for-it teams, instead of, trading for the PJ Washingtons and Daniel Gaffords of the world, because those are exceedingly more challenging trades in this new market, to make sure you're making the money match and not taking back more and blah, 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 is the world chasing the Duop Reaths, finding value on the minimums. And I think there is a world in which that benefits the Blazers very specifically, either in being a team that can grease 3-team trades with some of their lower priced players at the bottom of their roster, or just specifically saying, like, yes, we will accept your second-round picks. Send us all of your picks that can be eventually traded for, other teams. Expensive teams are going to want second-round picks in the future. The Blazers can move those around, move up in the second round to chase guys, to find their Toumani Kamaras of the future. Is there a world in which the best use of their assets is just being a team that ships out cheap folks and isn't able to move their more expensive ones? It's trade season. Not yet. and even when it arrives, probably after Christmas, it might be a quiet one. But I think it's going to be a unique study in how this CBA works, how this collective bargaining agreement goes down, and how the business needs to get finished and completed and to the finish line, I should say. And then the Blazers will either be open for business and able to move multiple players and blah, 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 or they will have limited path and still, very specifically, a fifth center on the roster that has value in the market. Do the Phoenix Suns want to sign a fourth former Blazers center over the last 2 seasons? Duop Reath, welcome to the desert. I will say, just real quick before we get out of here, I love Duop Reath, one of my favorite players in the league, a dude who I'm just always going to be rooting for. I hope if he does get traded by the Blazers because his value as a minimum guy, I hope he goes somewhere fun, and I hope that fun team goes deep into the playoffs and Duop Reath, hits 2 threes late in the third quarter of some game 6 in the postseason. You're like, Duop, game changer. I'll certainly be rooting for it. Okay, come back for tomorrow's show. We're going to talk about draft prospects. Fun week. No Blazers basketball games. We can do whatever we want. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.